Good afternoon and welcome to Willow's Green Permaculture.
This is part 2 of 2 because I should be able to get all of the last 50 minutes into one video and have the dubbing work instead of having to make 2 different parts, 2 and 3. We'll see. It's just about the first minute and a half that repeats because I repeat the intro for anybody who hasn't seen the first part.
Today I'm going to be bringing to you 5.5 years of experience growing our own food and growing enough for a year. I'm going to talk to you about some of our favorite vegetables and some of the easiest vegetables to grow and to get a whole lot of, and they're delicious and why, and I'll give you some advice for each. I'm also going to tell you about some of the vegetables that we're going to continue to grow, but we need to do things differently, and I'm going to tell you how we've done them and how we need to do them differently. And I'm also going to be telling you about some of the vegetables that we're not going to be growing anymore because we just don't think that it's worth the effort, and we can get what we need from those vegetables from plenty others, and we'll let you know what those alternatives are too. And I've got all these cue cards here to kind of help me remember everything that all the different things I want to talk about, because I'm always forgetting stuff. So if you're someone who's just getting into growing your own food, or you've been doing it for a while and you just want some really useful tips, really useful advice that's going to help you do better, grow better, get more food, get better food, get food that you can grow while you're respecting nature and while you're basically celebrating nature all around you and actually having nature help you. If this kind of thing interests you, then let's get started. Obviously, another good replacement for spinach is lettuce. And lettuce, like the dill, we will grow it as a companion plant for our tomatoes. Why is that? I'll show you. Here's our lettuce. That doesn't look much like lettuce, but that's our lettuce seed. That's our lettuce that's a little, very tiny little bit of lettuce that has bolted and gone to seed. Because that's the thing, when we harvest our lettuce, we don't pull the plant, we cut the plant. Sometimes we'll just cut some leaves off if it hasn't finished growing, but once it's grown into a nice big beautiful head, we'll just cut it. Cut the plant and leave the base, and often there'll be more lettuce that we can again harvest, and we'll do it again the same way, and then at some point we'll just stop harvesting it, we'll let the plant grow, and what happens? Well, the lettuce is going to spike up and grow to about 4 or 5 feet tall. No, 4.5 feet tall, let's say 1.20 meters to 1.50 meters, and it'll grow thousands and thousands of flowers, and around the same time as the dill will also reach its height. And then those, you see, the lettuce and the dill we plant sort of around on the outside of our tomatoes, and so what they're going to do is not only, the dill is aromatic, it's going to help the tomatoes, but the lettuce and the dill, when they're in flower, they're going to be in flower at the same time as the tomatoes are in flower, so they're going to attract all the pollinators. Plus, we like to plant, indeterminate tomatoes, because they give you a bigger harvest, because they're the kind of tomato plants that grow everywhere, and we don't prune them, and so we do trellis them a little bit. I could use probably some more trellising for my tomatoes, but the dill and the lettuce, when they're really tall and they've got very strong stems, they help us trellis those tomatoes. We take some of those long vines that have some tomatoes starting to grow on them that might be trailing along the ground. We'll gently lift them up without breaking the vine, and we'll drape them over the dill plant, or we'll drape them over the lettuce plant. And then the tomato is no longer going to be lying on the ground, it's going to be hanging from the dill or the lettuce plant. So that really works. Okay, and another tip about tomatoes is if you found a tomato that you really like we have so many that are so nice. Look at these tomatoes. This is an Amana orange. This is it's either a Sicilian saucer or it's an Italian heirloom, I can't remember. And then this one here is a black crim, but it also could be a purple Cherokee. I'm not exactly sure the difference. I grew both and they looked exactly the same. They could be just two names for the same thing. So really lots of nice tomatoes. Then we got a whole bunch of these ones, which are called, they're a type of they're aroma type tomato, except that they're purplish. They're called purple Russian. Really love these ones. Another one, they're all kind of all buried in my pot here, but I've got a miniature one, but they grow really big, like that big, are these ones, which are pink heart-shaped tomatoes. I think they might be the same thing as ox heart tomatoes. Really nice. And also I think they're the same thing as Joya de Oaxaca tomatoes, which they're all like, they've got pink, sort of a pinkish skin, and they're heart-shaped. Really nice. And when you found some tomatoes, you like them, well, and these are all heirloom, by the way. I tried the hybrids last year, didn't like them as much. And you know, when you collect the seeds, you don't know what you're going to get, whereas generally the heirloom seeds you collect will much of the time grow true. Sometimes they'll cross with other tomatoes, and then we get these new varieties. The same thing happens with the peppers, of course. Some peppers cross, and we get these new varieties. But if you found some tomato you really like, well, then when you cut it up to eat it in a sandwich, like you know, I love to eat tomatoes in sandwiches. When I'm cutting it up, a lot of the seeds fall onto the cutting board, so I'll just keep them and just to go put them onto a piece of recycled paper, let that dry up, and once it's good and dry, then I'll just stick it into an envelope for next year. So there are some tips for tomatoes. Now I'd like to talk about something that we want to do differently next year, and that is cucumbers. Here's some advice for cucumbers. So here we got some cucumbers for you. Here's like a regular one. It's pretty small. Now, the way I've been gardening, cucumbers have not been something that's done particularly well here. I suppose if I concentrated on them, which I want to do next year, concentrate a little bit more on them, then we'll get more cucumbers. We did get quite a few, but the problem is the way I garden, because you know, for example, I'll plant beans with almost everything. Well, they end up hiding everything. And the weeds I let grow end up hiding everything. And cucumbers are like onions, and they're like carrots. They don't like competition. They don't like having other plants around them. And so next year I'm gonna plant at least 2 cucumber plants inside our greenhouse. Because you see, this is what ends up happening with me with my cucumbers, is I end up not seeing them until they turn orange or yellow, because then you can see them in the background. I'm very lucky if I find one green, and so we get them like this. But even orange and yellow, it's fine. I mean, you can still, these are still really good for pickling. They're just not as crunchy on the inside, but they're excellent for pickling, and they still have all the good properties. And when they're this color, well, they're almost ready for collecting the seeds, if you like to collect your seeds. Now, next year, what am I going to do is I'm going to put the cucumbers, basically I'm going to isolate them like I've isolated in the past. I've isolated onions and carrots, and sometimes even watermelon. I'm going to isolate them, but still do companion planting, because when I've isolated some other plants in the past and almost done like a miniature monoculture, that's when I've run into problems. Like one year, in the space that I plant 24 tomato plants this year, I planted about 50 of them back in 2023, and I lost most of them to the blight. And however, luckily, and that's why I tried the hybrid tomatoes last year, but I knew why I lost those to the blight. It's because I didn't do companion planting with them. And so these last 2 years I've been using the dill, the lettuce, the basil around the tomatoes, and in carrots too. They really work, they really help, and I've made sure I've given my tomatoes space. And of course, this year with the drought, there was no danger of blight, because blight is a fungal problem, and when you got like 50 tomatoes crammed into a spot where you should only have about 12 of them, well, the rainwater is not going to evaporate off the leaves, and that's where you're going to have problems with blight. Because I don't do things like, I certainly don't use pesticides and chemical sprays and so on, but I also don't bother with the homemade ones, like using, I don't know, whatever, you know, using soap or baking soda or whatever. I don't bother with any of that. And I don't use BTK either, because that kills, it might kill some of the bad bugs, but it kills the caterpillars of the good native bugs too, if they're eating at the same time as the problematic ones. So, but by the way, that year that we lost most of our tomatoes, one of them that survived was this one. And I made sure to keep the seeds, and look at what that's given us. just beautiful, 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 resistant to the blight. Another type of tomato that's resistant to the blight are, I'll show you. I'm not done talking about the cucumbers, but are any type of cherry tomato, like this one. I remember at the end of the season when I had already cleared out all those tomatoes that had died from the blight. There was like nothing left. And then like about 2 months later, I found a couple of these on the ground. And so somehow those plants had survived the blight. Not only survived it, but regrew. And so these are called yellow pear tomatoes. Another type that's really resistant to the blight are these. These are coyote tomatoes I got from Fruition Seeds several years ago. But I've been collecting the seeds ever since, and they always grow true. Same thing with these. I've had these since 1990 when I got some seeds from the experimental farm in Ottawa. And then here, these are Chiapas tomatoes, also blight resistant. I got these from Fruition Seeds as well, the seeds, several years ago. Okay, let's get back to the cucumbers. So that's what I'm going to do with the cucumbers. I'm going to isolate them. I'm going to make sure I trellis them well so they can grow up. I'm going to make sure that I water them at their base, just like you should do with pumpkins and squash, which are in the same family, just like you should do with watermelon, which is in the same family. Don't water on top. You might say, well, I mean, when it rains, they get watered on top. But the thing is, when it rains, it's different. You got different conditions. It's cloudy, it's not sunny, so you're not going to get any burn and stuff like that. You should never water anything while it's sunny, by the way. But and rainwater is different than whatever you might be watering from, maybe. There are a whole bunch of reasons, and they're not coming to my mind right now, but maybe I'll do a short later to talk about what's the difference between when they say you have to water at the base and don't water on top, because it can make the plant sick, and whereas rain doesn't, let's say. Well, anyways, I could get into that later. However, here's a cucumber that will do well even if your regular cucumbers aren't doing well. This is a cucumber that's really independent, and I call it a Caribbean cucumber, concombre des Antilles. It's also called a Caribbean gherkin, I think it's called, and it's from the Caribbean. Grows really nice. These are actually from Guadeloupe. These seeds. I actually got them from La Société des Plantes in Quebec, but that's where the seeds come from. And these don't look like they're very edible. In fact, they kind of look a little bit like wild cucumbers, but these are not wild cucumbers. They look spiny, but you can eat the whole thing. They're great for pickling. They taste just like cucumbers, and they're really nice. So it's nice to slice them and then eat them that way, or to pickle them, like I said. But they're really nice. Really interesting conversation piece too. Okay, let's continue. Something that I'm going to do differently here. Let's talk about cabbage. Well, the whole cabbage family I'm going to do differently next year. And I plant a whole bunch of things in the cabbage family. I plant curly kale, purple Russian kale. Sometimes I plant kohlrabi. This year I tried Brussels sprouts. I plant green cabbage. I plant this type of cabbage called red calabash cabbage, a really nice cabbage, nice purple cabbage. I've also planted broccoli and cauliflower. So let's start with the broccoli and cauliflower. I'm not going to plant cauliflower anymore, and I'm not going to plant Brussels sprouts anymore. I just find that they take up too much space. They require too much effort to do well. You know, if they get a small issue, like I said, I like my plants to be independent. And if they get a small issue, because I don't cover my stuff up with roll cover, although that might be something I'll try next year for my cabbages. But any little small problem and the flower doesn't develop, and then you don't get a harvest. Broccoli, I'm going to plant fewer because, once again, I just find it takes up too much space for what you get from it. And what I'm going to plant more of is a lot more kale, a lot more curly kale, a lot more. Another kale we plant is dino kale and purple Russian kale. All three of those do really well, and they give us a lot of kale, and you can keep harvesting and harvesting and harvesting and harvesting, and they keep giving and giving and giving and giving, and they give you the same nutrients as broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts, and of course so does cabbage. And we're going to keep planting cabbage, but I'm going to be planting less cabbage so that my cabbages can just be bigger. Again, I'm going to give them more space, and for a few of them I'm going to try some row cover so that I'm not, let's say, dealing with the bugs as much. However, the thing about cabbage and bugs is when the bugs will actually go after the cabbage when it's still very small, and they're going to go and get into let's say the center, and they're going to start eating it. But the thing is, they have like a cycle, and when their cycle's done, as long as your cabbage plant is healthy, it's going to keep growing. All my cabbage got full of the cabbage bugs this year, in spite of all the companion planting we do, because it's probably a good idea to rotate them into very different spots. But then again, those white cabbage moths, they're everywhere all the time. And the thing is, they're an important species too, because if ever you wanted your cabbage seed, let's say, if you wanted to let it go to flower and go to seed, it's probably going to be those ones, the cabbage moths, more than anything else that's going to be pollinating them. Now, so the thing is, the cabbage is going to grow, and it grows from the center. So in fact, all the damage that got done was on the will eventually be on the outer leaves, like you can see a little bit right here. There was more on the other outer leaves. And also, when you harvest your cabbage, you'll see a lot of these things sometimes growing. You see that? They look like little Brussels sprouts. And so when you harvest your cabbage, don't harvest the whole plant, cut it, try and leave some of these there. And these little sprouts here will grow into new cabbages if you have enough time in the season. But even if they don't grow into big cabbages, they'll still grow into small cabbages that you can harvest. So there's some advice about cabbage. I'm going to try row cover on maybe 4 to 6 cabbages next year to see how it does. I've always been kind of skeptical about row covering, because with row cover, what you're doing is, okay, so you don't need the cabbage to get pollinated, because it's not going to flower before you harvest it. So the row cover is not going to stop it from being pollinated. But the problem with row cover is, yes, it might protect it from any aerial bugs, that are flying around. But what about the stuff that's coming out from the soil? It's not going to protect them from those. And in fact, those bugs that are going to come and start eating it from under the soil are going to have wonderful protection from the birds with the row cover. So I've been skeptical about it. But next year, I'm going to give it a try, and we'll see how it goes. I've never done it before. We'll give it a try. Let's continue. Let's talk about some fruit. This is a really, really great fruit to have for, let's say, in a food forest. This is quince. It's actually called purple flowering quince. There are 3 or 4 different species of quince. This one's called purple flowering quince, Chenomeles japonica. It's not native here, but the thing is, I planted this tree bare root in 2020, and it's been giving us big harvest since last year, since 2024, which is really nice, because at the same time as planting this quince, I also planted bare root apple trees, bare root plum trees, bare root pear trees, and a few others. And they haven't really started giving much. We've gotten some plums, not a whole lot, not nearly as many of these, and we haven't really gotten any apples and pears. We do harvest pears from an existing tree that was dying when we moved here, because it had its roots waterlogged all the time. So we fixed that problem, and we've had bumper crops for the last 3 years from that pear tree. Another tree, or shrub I should say, and the quince is actually a shrub. It's beautiful, beautiful shrub. Another one of those shrubs is that we planted at the same time back in 2020. It's hazelnut. Look at this beautiful harvest of hazelnut that we got this year, and we're not done yet. It's really nice. We still have a lot left, and today I'm doing an experiment. I harvested some while they looked still a little bit green, or they were still kind of a little bit stuck to the branch, but I want to test to see if they'll finish ripening. All the others I waited until they were brown and kind of like really hanging down and really easy to pull off the branch. So I'm going to experiment and see what happens with these guys, because it's nice to know that you can pick some things when they're not completely ripe, because that's one strategy of beating the animals to them, let's say, so you get them before the animals. Because the thing is, we have lots and lots of animals that come around on our property, and that's fine. We're really happy about it because they actually help us with, and I've spoken about that in lots of videos, how birds and other animals have planted wild grapes for us. We get huge harvests of those. They've planted black-cap raspberries for us. We get huge harvests of those, and so many other plants. We have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of plant and fungus species on our property, whereas it was practically a grassy monoculture when we arrived back in December of 2019. However, one thing we do for the animals is far away from our garden, we'll plant stuff. For example, and also in our garden, we plant a lot of sunflowers. We plant lots and lots of sunflowers. Actually, we don't actually plant them. We only planted them in 2020. We planted them once. We basically didn't harvest them that year. I can't remember how many we had. Maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 10. I can't remember then. And most of them were the multiple seeds, although we had a few multiple flowered ones, although we had a few of the giant ones as well. And we didn't harvest them. We just let them stay there. We let the birds harvest them. We let the squirrels harvest them. And what the birds and the squirrels and probably raccoons did for us is they harvested them. They took some of them. Sometimes squirrels will take them away completely, like this one. They'll just take it off, take it away completely, and eat it somewhere else. And so they basically replanted the sunflowers for us everywhere. So why is that a good thing? It's a good thing because when lots of your stuff is ready to harvest or close to ready to harvest, so are the sunflowers. In fact, the sunflowers, the animals will go after them even before they're ready, and when they're ready, and after they're ready, when they're drying up. So there's a very, very, very long period of time. Sunflowers will start being attractive to animals probably at the beginning of August, right up until the end of the season, right up until the end of November, especially if you got enough of them. And so they will distract the squirrels, they'll distract the raccoons, the birds. For example, yellow finches, love them. If you like yellow finches, plant sunflowers. And we get so many, we have literally probably hundreds of sunflowers spread all over the land here. And so we do harvest some. And if you want to know when they're ready to harvest, when they're not, because you don't want them to be overripe, especially if you want to sort of eat them fresh, you want to grill the flower or something like that. Well, you harvest them when you see that the petals are starting to shrink and stuff. And then, don't wait until they're completely off because the birds will have beaten you to it. Okay, so when you start to see kind of the petals start to fall, when I took this, all the petals were there, but between the time I took it and doing the video, they all finished falling off. And so anyway, but that's how you can get a harvest from your sunflowers. Now, some people I've seen, I've read, I've studied that sunflowers are allelopathic, meaning they're not good for other vegetables because of something that they express out of their roots. But that's only really if, your plant is here and your sunflower is here and the roots are basically touching. But if there's any distance between them, there's no problem. And in fact, the truth is the sunflowers will benefit all their plants. Like they'll benefit your tomatoes, they'll benefit your climbing plants. Your climbing plants won't benefit the sunflowers though. Like if you got beans growing up your sunflowers, whoa, the sunflowers don't like it. They'll end up bending way over because of course sunflowers like to be able to move. That's why they're called sunflowers. They like to tilt like this. So they're gonna tilt their flower to the sun. And so first thing in the morning, you'll see them facing in one way, like actually late at night, like before the morning, they'll be facing west. And then through the morning, you'll see them turn east. And then through the day, they're gonna turn back west again and finish the day west. And then when the sun rises, they'll start turning east again. And so if you got like beans twining up your sunflowers, it's gonna make it hard for the sunflower to make that movement. And it's gonna, it's gonna maybe fall over and that kind of stuff. But there's some advice for sunflowers. Okay, what else? Let me see. Well, let's talk about some squash. Squash is wonderful. These are a couple of my favorites. This is delicata squash, and then another one that's very similar in size but not in shape it's a rounder type, it's more like this, but smaller, is sweet dumpling. Those are probably two of my favorite squashes for their flavor, and even the seeds, which are tiny, they're so delicious. And another favorite, of course, is anything in the butternut family. Now this is sort of a butternut, but it's more like a cross between a butternut and I can't remember the name, but it's a pumpkin looking squash that has the same coloring as butternut. It's really big and it's got these big lobes. It looks like almost like a Halloween type pumpkin, but like an old-fashioned, what do you call it, you know, fairy tale carriage type pumpkin with those big lobes, but it's this color and it's shiny. And then another one, this is a real miniature version, but usually they can be huge, is the crookneck, which is also in the butternut family. These are probably the most delicious flesh of all the pumpkin and squash, is the butternut family. However, a video you've probably seen, oh, and here's another one of our favorites. It's the buttercup squash, which is a very similar flavor as to the acorn squash. So these are a bunch of favorites. Another one, I don't have it here for how it looks, is the Queensland blue. That's such a beautiful, beautiful squash because of its bluish hue when it grows. And then so when you harvest it, if it's still blue and then the flesh is bright orange, the contrast is amazing. But eventually it will ripen to kind of this pinky orange, which is really, really nice. Now, you've seen me talking about squash vines for supper. And so the only thing you need to know is the butternut type of squash, either the crookneck or the butternut or the other one that I spoke about. Those squash are recommended for planting if you want to have fewer problems with the squash vine borer. Why? Because the vine is hard, it's not juicy, it's very fibrous, and so the squash vine borer doesn't really like it or has a rough time boring into it. So they generally leave it alone and they'll go after the Queensland blue. They love the Queensland blue. They'll go after that like a magnet. They'll go after, like sometimes I will plant a whole bunch of Queensland blue seeds 2 or 3 weeks before I plan on planting sowing my squash. Why? So the bugs all go to those ones, do their thing, birds will go after them, scare them away and so on, and then when they're done their cycle, probably towards mid to end June, that's when I will sow all of my pumpkin and squash. When it's really hot, but early enough that we're not going to get into drought situations, because obviously pumpkin squash, they need their water. They need lots of water. But so I need to time it late enough so that the bug problem, I've already passed it. But the other thing is the squash love the heat, and if you sow them when basically mid to end June, they're going to sprout super fast within a day or two. I used to sow them in May and they'd take sometimes a couple weeks to sprout, and then they'd grow slowly. So the bugs would go after them and basically decimate them when they were quite small. I don't like using row cover on them because when they start to flower, obviously I don't like to bother hand pollinating them either. So I just like them to grow on their own, and so when it's already hot, they'll sprout quickly, they'll grow quickly, they'll spread quickly, and because they just love that heat. So there's some advice for squash. And another piece of advice, because I still love that Queensland blue, even though the squash vine borers love them too. What I do to prevent problems with the squash vine borer is, as soon as that vine is like turning into a vine, then anywhere where you've got a leaf node, and I will just show you that with this piece of sorghum here. Actually, no, I don't see any leaf nodes on there. I'll use this piece of garlic stem to show you. You see where the leaf meets the stem? Well, where the leaf stem meets the stem of the vine of the pumpkin, you're going to have like little bumps there on the pumpkin vine. So I cover those little bumps, either with mulch, with leaves, with weeds, or with soil, with compost, whatever you have to cover them, get them into closer contact with the soil, and those little bumps, those little leaf nodes will sprout roots. So that way, if this is your pumpkin vine here, and this is the base, this is the root here, and it's growing along the ground, and you've buried it here where there's a leaf node, and Here where there's a leaf node, roots will grow, and often the squash vine borer, well, it's going to get at the plant early, so it's going to get at it near its base. Most often you're going to see the squash vine borer damaged near the base, and so if it gets at it there, it doesn't matter, because you're going to have roots here, you're going to have roots here, and wherever else you buried it. And so your base is going to get destroyed, but the plant is still going to thrive. And in fact, with all those extra roots, if it doesn't get attacked by the squash vine borer, it's just going to be that much stronger. And if it does get attacked, well, it's going to do just fine. So there's some advice for squash and pumpkins. And another bit of advice for squash and pumpkins is sometimes your squash the fruit will start to grow even though it's not been properly pollinated. And so if you notice your fruit is staying really small, like these, look at these zucchinis here. Now these are relatively small zucchinis, but they're a size I like to harvest them at because they're nice and tender. I also like to harvest them bigger for using in bread and cake and stuff like that, and also for collecting seed and for having it stay through a couple months into the winter. However, sometimes the fruit will stay small. And if you notice it's staying small and it's really not growing, it's probably because it wasn't properly pollinated, and it'll probably end up rotting. And so before it ends up rotting, and also while it's still growing, the plant's going to try and get it to grow. It's going to try and it's going to try, but if it doesn't, and so it's going to take energy away from new squash that it wants to, that it might want to have grow. So you're going to get new little blooms with new little fruit at the base of them with the female flowers, and they're just going to dry up because the plant's trying to get the little one to grow. So I'll cut them. If I see new flowers and new female flowers with the fruit at the base, I'll cut the small ones so the plant can give energy for those other ones. Okay, let's continue. So I'm almost done. I've checked my cue cards here because there's so many things to talk about. And let's talk about corn now. Corn is something where I put it under my no list, but it's not really a no list. One reason why it might be a no list is because I haven't tried nixtamalization yet. And nixtamalization is a process where you put your corn kernels into a lye solution or a baking soda solution. Like you can use a very clean ash from your campfire, let's say, if you didn't put any junk in there. And you can nixtamalize your corn. It's what they do in Mexico. It's what's been done for centuries and centuries, if not millennia, to make the corn something that you can actually absorb the nutrients into your body. It's where the word pozole comes from. It's where the word pozole is a soup made from nixtamalized corn, where you've got those swollen, because what the nixtamalization does is it swells up the kernel and it does something to it so the nutrients are available. And for example, the word tamal, a meal that's eaten in Mexico using corn flour or cornmeal. They'll either stuff banana leaves with them or they'll stuff corn husk leaves with them. And the word tamal, while you hear the base there is nixtamalization. So the tamal comes from that as well. The corn is only really of nutritional value if you've nixtamalized it, and I haven't tried that yet. I do want to try it though as soon as possible, and with the corn this year, I'll probably give it a try. But the other reason why I might say no to corn, well, what the no is I'm not planting it. This year I didn't plant it in my main garden. I only planted it way out back, completely on the other side of the land. And why is that? It's because corn is a real magnet for raccoons and for deer and for other animals, for squirrels too probably. And so I don't mind the animals eating some of the corn, because so long as they eat it while it's still green and they don't tear down the whole plant, then the corn can still produce ears. And I've had that in the past where the ears it produces are a bit smaller, but it still produces ears even if the first ones got eaten by deer or raccoon or anything else. But what I don't like is when they make a huge mess in the garden. When they're going after the corn and they're going through everything else and they make a big mess and they knock plants down, and it just makes it's not pretty. Even though my gardens look really wild, as far as I'm concerned, I think they're beautiful. but I don't like everything to get torn down. And so I plant it way out back. It's there for the animals to eat. I make sure that I do the three sisters, so I surround them with as much squash as I can, and I put teepees up so beans can grow up the teepees and attach themselves to the corn stalks while they're also growing up the teepees. And so those bean vines are going to hold those corn stalks up on a windy day, because corn stalks all by themselves, they can often get knocked down on a windy day, or they can get knocked down by animals. But if they're attached to the beans, which are attached to the teepee, they're not going to get knocked down. And so this is how I like to do the corn. I do like to make it available to the animals, and then we harvest some of it. And no matter what, we always get lots of beans and lots of squash. And the thing is, we also plant beans everywhere else in our garden, and we also have a pumpkin and squash patch. And so we not only plant the pumpkins and squash with the three sisters, we plant it elsewhere. Next thing I want to talk about are potatoes. Now, I haven't done the harvest yet, but I'm going to show you these because this is a little bit interesting. My advice about potatoes is be careful where you plant them, because you don't want them near your tomatoes, because potatoes can carry the potato blight and the tomato blight, and the blight can pass from potatoes to tomatoes, so you don't want your potatoes to grow near your tomatoes. And the thing is, wherever you plant potatoes, they're going to come back, because you can't kill them. They come back. At least here, they've come back every year. Wherever we've had them planted, wherever we've thrown a potato because it had gone bad and we threw it in the compost, it just regrew. And here's what I can show you about the tenacity of potatoes. These, which of course do not look appetizing at all, these are a couple of dried up purple Peruvian potatoes, which when they were freshly harvested, it would have been at the harvest last, let's say October of 2024, I would have harvested them. And then of course I kept some just in case I needed for seed. Now in the end, I didn't plant potatoes this year because I knew they'd all come back, and they all did come back. So all the potatoes I kept for seed, I didn't do anything with them. They stayed in my garage, in a box, in the dark. And these shoots here have been there since like March or April. These shoots have been there. And look, the shoots aren't dead. They've been sitting in a box. No soil, no watering, no light. They've been sitting in that box since October or November of 2024. And since about March or April of 2025, they've had these little shoots on them. And they're just now, of course, I feel kind of bad because they're probably kind of suffering. But anyway, I could plant these and they will grow after sitting in a dark box with no soil, no water, no light for almost a year. And they would grow. These are purple Peruvian. I don't know if all potatoes behave this way, although all our potatoes come back. All the different varieties come back. So my advice about potatoes is be careful where you plant them. And we let the squash bugs do their thing on the potatoes. Although next year I might try just shaking them off and onto little blankets and then throwing them, into prairie type areas so the birds can more easily get at them. But generally, I've let the potato bugs, let's say, have their fill of the plants, because generally what happens is they have their fill, they're finished their cycle. The potatoes have lost a lot of leaves, and this is usually by about mid-July this happens, maybe end of July. But then there's still tons of season left for the potatoes to bounce back, put all their vines back, and keep growing, and for the potatoes to fill in. This year, however, with the drought, the potatoes had a real rough time in one area where they got lots of bugs bouncing back. And so what I should have done was shaken those bugs off earlier in the season. But I didn't. And I don't know if I'm going to do it next year. We'll see. We'll have to see what the harvest looks like. And we have potatoes growing in so many different spots, and in the other areas they did quite well. So that's what you got for potatoes. Okay, what else? I talked about beans. Beans are great. Easiest thing you can grow ever. And if you're vegan or vegetarian or whatever, and and you need a source of protein. Well, beans are the best, and you can make tofu out of beans. You can make all sorts of different stuff out of beans. All right, beets. Here's one that's really good. I actually don't have any here to show you, but beets are amazing because they tolerate the weeds around them. They're one of the best ones to kind of like the way that we garden, and they're really, really healthy, so full of antioxidants. I just love them. And surprisingly, with beets, I also plant them in small pots ahead of time, but I only plant one seed per small pot because the seeds are composite. And so you'll end up having 2 or 3 beets inside that little pot growing, like 2 or 3 sprouts. And then when you transplant them into the ground, you leave them together, because the thing is, they'll all grow stuck to each other, and they'll grow at different speeds. Let's say you'll have one bigger before the other 2, let's say, and so when you can harvest the one and then leave the other 2 so they have time to get bigger and so on. You just have to, let's say these are my beets, and this is the big one and this is the small one. Well, I'll put my finger on the small one to keep it in the ground, and I'll pull the big one out of the ground, and then the small one can keep growing and get bigger. So there's some advice about beets. Now here's a no one, one that I unless I decide to plant it in pots. Rosemary is a plant that there's so many of our herbs, like they come back every year. I'm talking about thyme, lavender, sage, catnip, all the mints, oregano, you name it, all of those things, yarrow, there's a long list of them, and they all come back every single year. But the one for our 5B 6A garden, rosemary doesn't survive the winter. The only way I've gotten rosemary to survive the winter is by just planting it in pots and bringing those pots in for the winter. But I find that's a lot of work. However, we're doing a special project this year. We are installing in front of our garage doors, we're installing in front of them greenhouse type doors that are basically going to cover the garage doors, but be far enough in front of them they're not going to cause any problems with opening and closing the garage doors. We never have a vehicle in there, and so basically we want to turn the basically front area of our garage into a bit of a greenhouse for the winter, because it will hold on to the heat better than an outdoor greenhouse. And basically what we will do during the daytime when it's sunny is we will open the garage doors, and then the sun will pour in, because our garage our garage doors face south, and so the sun will pour in, heat up the garage. And we have a few, like we have a couple lemon trees. Friends of ours just gave us a little fig tree, and I also have a couple rosemary plants in the garden. I might dig those up, put them in a pot. I might even try overwintering a pepper, you never know, and we can do that in the garage. But I've always found overwintering more work than it's worth, but we'll see. I do it with our tropical plants, with our papaya. I've got a type of Bursera, a copal blanco, that I grew from seed. Over 10 years ago I started growing it, and it's quite beautiful. It's in the frankincense family. Of course, those I keep indoors through the winter. So there are some plants I do that with. Another no is cantaloupe and sweet potato. Watermelons do really well here. Cantaloupe, not so much. And I'm not as much of a fan of cantaloupe anyway. So the effort to get it to grow well, I figured no, I'm not going to bother with it. Another one is sweet potato. I've tried it a few times, but it's just not warm enough here. If I could get slips of it in the spring from an Asian grocery store, because they sell them like it's spinach, then I could probably grow it more quickly. A friend of ours starts them in February inside with a whole ton of grow lights and stuff. But once again, that's just, I find that's too much work. Even though I do love sweet potato, and I say I'm not going to grow it again, but I don't know if I'm going to stick to that or not. Yes, of course, it's edible flowers. So many wonderful edible flowers out there. The petals of sunflowers are edible. In fact, the whole flower is edible, and we grill them sometimes. And hollyhocks. I've got the list here: hollyhock, calendula, evening primrose, marigolds, nasturtium, wild bergamot, chapiche flower, anise, hyssop, you name it. All these flowers are edible, and they're just so wonderful. You add them to salads and stuff like that. Really healthy. You can make syrups out of them. You can make candy out of them, and they're pretty. And the more, of course, that you pick those blooms and you don't let them go to seed, well, the more blooms you're going to get. So you get flowers all summer. Last but not least, one of my favorite plants, because I'd love to replace my kitchen sponges with them, and I'd like to use them in the shower and all the rest of it. Luffa. It's not something I grow to eat, but it's something that I grow to use. I've used the Luffa that I grew last year. It works so well. It works well for washing the dishes. It works well for, let's say, scrubbing potatoes or carrots. You're not using microplastics to scrub those potatoes and carrots. You're using Luffa, and it does a real good job. And also for, let's say, what's it called, exfoliating in the shower, really good as well. Luffa, excellent plant, but I haven't perfected it yet. The drought wasn't good for the Luffa this year, although we've got a number of them growing. I'll show them to you when they're ready. But you see, last year I planted the Luffa in the same spot as the birdhouse gourd. But the birdhouse gourd grows like crazy here. And so that's another one. That's another yes, by the way. Birdhouse gourd is just so much fun to grow. And so I'm going to keep growing that, but I don't grow it in the same place as the Luffa, because it smothers the Luffa. Now, I started my Luffa, I got it growing, and once I saw it was growing, I added beans to where the Luffa was growing, because I figured the Luffa wasn't going to cover my cattle panels, and so I grew some beans to fill in the holes. Well, the beans just went crazy. I tried trimming them, but they just kept going crazy, and so they kind of shaded out the Luffa, I find, a little bit this year. So next year, what I'm going to do differently with the Luffa is, first of all, when I started in I think it's March or April, I can't remember. I think it's probably late March when I started. I'm going to start it at the same time as the peppers in big pots, at least that big, rather than the tiny little ones I use, the little, like, whatever cells. I'm going to start them in big pots so I don't have to, because a few of them I transplanted them while they were still indoors into bigger pots, and that's no good. Anything in the watermelon family, pumpkin family, pumpkin, squash, luffa, cucumbers, watermelon, all that stuff, they don't like being transplanted. So if you're going to transplant them twice, forget it. And so I'm going to put them into bigger pots. And I don't like to use the pots that decompose, because they always get issues. I've had issues with them in the past. So I just plant them in pots and make sure they're really, really healthy when it's time to transplant them. And it's really, really hot out. We're talking probably end of June is when I'd transplant them. And I'm going to wait until I see a good, healthy growth, probably by mid-July, when they've maybe reached halfway up the cattle panel. Only then will I add the beans, because the thing about beans is, they like the heat. You can plant beans here in our 5B, 6A garden as early as, let's say, the last day of May or the first week of June. And you can direct sow them and they grow quickly. But you don't have to plant them that early. You can plant them as late July and still get a harvest. You just won't get as much of a harvest. We plant them so we can harvest in the month of August. We harvest our green beans, whether they're purple, yellow, or whatever color they are. We harvest them in August while they're green, as in not ripe, as in haven't formed their seeds. And then once we've harvested enough of them, by the end of August, we've harvested enough, they'll last us all year. Then what we do is all the rest of the beans that are still on the vine, and because we've been harvesting them, there's still many more on the vine, because they don't give up until they've managed to ripen some dry seeds. So all the rest of those beans, we let them keep growing until they dry on the vine, and that's when we harvest them to have our beans. So that's one of our main sources of protein that we can grow here. We don't have animals. We still have at least 7 or 8 liters of dried beans from 2024, which are going to last us up until maybe December. And we're about to start harvesting our dried beans in October already, and we still have a ton left from last year, because beans are really, really versatile. You can do a whole lot with them. So I think I covered all the bases. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something from it. If you enjoyed it, please share with your friends. Please give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment or ask a question. I love to answer your questions and respond to your comments. And you know, when you do that, it's a real help. And in fact, I considered giving this message closer to the beginning of the video. You know, if you watch a lot of our videos and you really enjoy them and you'd like to see more, and you'd like to encourage that these videos get done, then supporting us by giving it a like or subscribing if you haven't done that yet, or sharing it with your friends. And something else you can do now is you can hype them, you can hype the video. All that stuff basically is a real help. It'll really help us. It'll allow us to get more views, and with more views we might get more longer views, because people who enjoy us might find us, and that will just help us out, because we earn a little bit of money from these videos, and believe me, that's a real help. And so if you could help us out that way, we would really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time.